Chapter 16. The hatch between airlock and the bulb-lit promenade hissed and smoothed shut behind her, the homemade corridor curving away ahead. In that moment, some higher power hit stop on the player. Abruptly, cruelly, every sound and movement ceased. Stillness. The follicles on her arm and scalp puckered closed. This world was separate and apart from the one she had just left. Her wounded leg ached powerfully. 98% of Chronon trainees washed out since they hit their first laboratory stutter, finding themselves isolated in a death-calm reality, a world in which they had no agency whatsoever. Flip most trainees out. They couldn't open doors, move objects, eat or drink anything. They couldn't be heard. Monarch psychologists concluded this triggered base-level lizard brain fears of entrapment, inflaming terrors of suffocation, dying alone, being forgotten, and nullification of self. 20% of candidates who washed out in the stutter training phase left the company, followed by institutional stays at Monarch's expense. Something about it disassembled people on a code level. Something about being in the tight, curving corridor, the thick air with a hot nasal tang of superheated metal, and the world gone voiceless. She understood why so many couldn't handle it. It was as close as Beth had come to being buried alive. She marched forward, fast, cleaned out of her thoughts with improvised ritual. Handgun loaded, hair tied and out of the way. Figured she must have been halfway around the loop. It was getting harder to breathe. She tried not to think about the possibility of the door not being open at the other end. Cricked her neck, rolled her shoulders. 3/4. Breathe, Zed, Ashley, Star, Wilder, whatever. Breathe. The exit hatch, dead ahead. Punch the release plate. Fuck, come on! She felt the charge bleat from the air. The promenade deactivated. Causality kicked back in. The promenade transformed completely. Lighting flicked from warm to cold, amber to white. The sterile chill of environmentally friendly fluorescence, half of which didn't work, replaced with the warm filament bulbs. As the floor beneath her feet snapped from waffle-treaded insulation to cheap and heavy iron grillwork, she almost lost her balance. Will's pentagonal corridor was gone. She was now in a four-sided corridor, the construction of which made Will's look like a masterwork of thoughtful craftsmanship. Will's promenade was gone. Beth laying at the doorsteps of what could have been the entrance of a moon-based methadone clinic. Get it together, Wilder. This is just the load screen. Beth leaned against the new wall. Her leg didn't want to take the weight, but she made it. Ignored the pain, put it in a room, locked the door. She glanced at the overheads. The type of fluorescent hadn't existed when Mill made the machine. The machine had grown older. Gun held in a double-handed grip. Beth peered into the airlock. Whatever this is, she told herself, it doesn't end here. Whatever this is can't possibly hurt you. She still had an appointment to keep with herself. Get out, reconnoiter, set a new destination, bug out. Simple plan's a good plan. The airlock had also changed. It could have been an old-school diving bell. Beth stepped inside, stiff-legged and south of the rusted grating a short squeal underfoot. The exit hatch was as heavy and submarinal as the rest of the machine's new construction. There was a single circular viewplate bolted into the exit hatch. Through its grimy cataract, she could tell the machine has moved. It was now in a very wide, open space. There were arches, just outside beyond them, light. Was the machine in some kind of pit? A four-spoked iron wheel was affixed to the center of the hatch. Leaning against the hatch was a crowbar. Holstering her pistol, she wedged the bar into the wheel, got leverage on it, and pushed downward. 2 attempts, and it gave. Beth cycled the wheel, released the hatch, and swung it wide. Thank fuck. The air outside was a little better than stale. Static atmosphere inside the machine. But she disembarked gracefully. Wherever she was, whenever she was, this place was almost certainly a basement. She descended a short stepladder to the floor of reclaimed brick. The roof was wood-reinforced plaster. The basement was divided by a plaster wall, itself broken into 3 brick-reinforced archways. Beth thumbed the light on her phone and looked back at the machine. It was a different beast now. Cruder, crappier, like a weekend survivalist's attempt at creating a submersible bunker. The only familiar thing about it was the core. That was Will's, wired into an odd new housing. By the stepladder was a wooden workbench, scored from decades of use. Its undershelf housed the cabling and innards of what Beth recognized as some kind of chronon battery, but it was markedly different from the models Monarch iterating upon. Fundamentals were all in place, though. Plus-size chronon aggregator from some kind of capacitor, shitloads of instrumentation and cabling, one strand of each of the tech spaghetti lotted up to the rubberized mat on which rested a thin plate of glass. The glass was illuminated with diagnostics, a view screen. The diagnostics told her the machine had chronon charge of 0. Her way home had gone out of business. If she didn't find a source of chronon energy someplace, the mission was a bust. Beyond the basement arches, a curtain of blue-white light dropped straight down from a smashed-out ceiling. Cautiously, she moved toward the light, noting banks of old freezers left and right, and wooden shelves stacked one on top of the other. Pressed to the sides of the pit, it was freezing in here. A wheeled scissor lift stood against the left wall. Construction lighting, halogen lamps on the telescoping yellow strands, were arranged in 4 corners, dead-eyed. Looking up, it was clear what happened. The ragged lip of the pit was about 12 feet up, accessible by a metal ladder of the lift. Up there, she could see what remained of what had once been a kitchen. Someone had knocked out the floor without grace or care. They'd also knocked out at least one of the kitchen walls. Someone had gotten a hold of William's time machine core, had chosen this place to set up operations, and used this house as a cover, a shell over their subterranean base of operations. All this she could deal with. What bothered her was her hearing. The sound down here had a strange quality to it, super crisp. Her footsteps and experimental cough all began and ended very sharply. No resonance. The atmosphere was thick with dust. She felt it against her face as she moved, resisting. She stopped by the ladder and gazed at the light that fell down from the upstairs world. She reached up, sweeping her hand gently through the day-lit particles suspended there. The motion of her hand carved a track, the motes moving aside obligingly, but nothing swirled to fill the space her hand cleared. Stasis. She shone her light back to the way it had come. Her passage from the machine to the ladder had carved a tunnel in the dusty air. She wiped a hand across her face. It came back thick with dust. Holstering her weapon and pocketing the phone, she climbed the stepladder up to the surface. Hands gripped to a floor paved in cracked, red and white tiling, she emerged into what could have been either construction or destruction. The wall between kitchen and living area was gone. The jagged remnants of the wall that was remained at ceiling level, trailing scraps of flower print paper from the 50s. 7 or 8 tables were stacked atop of each other and pushed to the walls. A few were kept as surfaces on which an array of tools and supplies. This had been a home converted into a sandwich shop. Chalkboards remained nailed to the one wall, offering basic food and soup at steep prices. $4 for a glass of water. There was a pile of mail gathered inside the front door. Beth walked through the clutter, shielding her mouth from the dust, and scrutinized the luridly enveloped junk letter at the top of the pile. The date stamp was enough to flush her heart with cold water. 2021. She knew what this was. When she was. A stutter was a hiccup. A moment temporarily self-dividing. Eventually it ends and time continues. As such, the odds of her emerging directly into a specific split second that had been affected by a stutter were statistically impossible. The only way the machine could have delivered her into the heart of frozen moment is if the machine's destination parameters had been toward forward so far into the future that there was nowhere, no when, farther to go. She reached for the faux brass door handle, stopped, caught by the sight of her ring-thin fingers, the wires tracking up her sleeves. Beth rapidly squeezed her right hand together twice, felt her fingertips tingled. Quickly she touched the door, freed it from the stutter, opened it, and double-squeezed again to kill the flow. She was going to need to conserve all the energy she could. The street was the same as the sandwich shop, which was the same as the basement. Uniform temperature, no resonance to sound. Muted colors as though life had bled from the world. Beth knew immediately where she was. The tree-lined street led straight to Riverport University campus several blocks away. The library was gone. A forest of 20-foot-tall crystal prisms stood in its place. A memorial, she supposed. The dome of the quantum physics building was still there. No doubt repaired and refurbished after Gibson had gotten through with it. The skyline wasn't so different. A few more skyscrapers, a few more apartment complexes. She turned and looked the other way. There it was. Monarch Tower. Still the biggest bastard on the block 5 years in the future. But not unscathed. Something had taken a swing that had misshapen obelisk and snapped a bite out of its top third. Black glass and reinforced concrete had been swept away. The rectilinear honeycomb of its innards now open to the air. The familiar distortion flicker of a chronon field enveloped the top of the building. Someone was alive up there, and keeping the lights on. It had been a brisk winter's day, and everything had stopped for the final time. Riverport, the world, the planets in their rotations, galaxies even. Every last thing in creation's inventory accounted for, and stopped. 2021 was when it happened. All her efforts would come to nothing. The countermeasure would not work. She sniffed, ran the heel of her palm across one eye, and checked the charge on the buckle of the rescue rig. She had 3 hours before she became one with the universe.